What are the connections that you and I need to have? There are things that you and I need inside of our lives. Man was created for connectivity. We've been created to connect to one another. Other people have something that we need in our lives, and we have something that other people need in theirs. Whether you realize this or not, God has never given each one of us, or He's never given any one of us, a life that doesn't make others necessary. People are the reason why we do the things that we do, or they are the reason why we don't do the things that we want to do. But they fit somewhere inside of that. Connectivity. So what in the world, what in all of the universe are the people that I need to be connected to? Who are the people that I need to have in my life? Whether you realize this or not, the people that are your connections are really the ones that are determining the outcome of everything that you do. Whether you're a success, whether you're a failure, whether you're a person who comes out on the top of life or the person who actually ends up at the bottom. There are some great people at the bottom, and there are some horrible people at the top. And how did that all happen? It was really all because of connections. In the Bible, there's something that we talk about all the time in Genesis chapter 2, verse number 18, and I'll give you my interpretation of this verse. He says, "And the Lord God said, it's not good for mankind to be alone. I will make him a companion who will help him." Most often people have the idea that he was talking about marriage from back to front, side to side, from top to bottom, but he wasn't. He was talking about connectivity and how important that it is for you and I to be connected to one another if we are going to be able to be successful in this life. There has to be some form of exchange. You can't do everything. When people lived so far away from each other, they were forced to be able to do everything. They milked the cows, they made the butter, they were the people who got the chickens, they were the people who fed the chickens, they were the people who killed the chickens in order for them to be able to have dinner, they were the people that cleaned the house, they were the people that planted the gardens and the fields. They did all of these kind of things, and there was no room for connectivity. But the moment all of a sudden you get a marketer for online social media platforms, you get a marketer to do that, and all of a sudden you go from being obscure to being somebody that's really popular the world over. Why is it? Because of connectivity. Why do we have bankers? It's connectivity. They connect us with the very finances that we need in order to be able to make our vision come true. One of my greatest observations about life is that it's foolish to believe that we determine the outcome of our lives, while in fact, it's those who we allow into our lives that really determine the outcome. Now, why is that true? It's true because relationships are magnetic, that they either draw you closer to what you want to achieve in life, or what they do is they drive you further away from the people or from the vision and the goals that you have for your life. Now, we find that there are books in the Bible that actually even speak about this. Here, David, the man that was after God's own heart, the one that God had really said that this is my guy, I love this guy. He starts out the book of Psalms with this idea. He said, "Now blessed is the man, happy, fortunate." He is a guy that we can look at and say, man, I want to be like him. That this person right here, that this guy that's really blessed is a guy that does not walk in the counsel of ungodly people. He begins to understand that his life will be determined by the quality of the individuals that he allows to be around him. He does not take shortcuts. There is no shortcut on the road to success. There may be expressways on the road to success, but there's no shortcut to be able to do it. So David said, "Blessed is the man that walks not in the counsel of the ungodly. He doesn't stand around. He doesn't hang out with sinners, nor does he sit in the seat down there at Sin Saloon. He doesn't sit there with people that are naysayers. They're disrespectful. They always talk about people. This guy does not do these kinds of things. But at the end of verse 3 in Psalm chapter 1, at the end of verse 3, it says that his leaf will also not wither, and whatever he puts his hands to will prosper. This guy, he's smart. But do you know sometimes that we can become too smart for our own good? Isn't that true? In the book of 2 Chronicles, in the Bible, it talks about a guy who was absolutely dedicated to God. God was dedicated to him. But what ended up happening was that he decided he was going to go into business with someone that God didn't want him going into business with. Do you know a lot of times what happens is we don't ever think that the people that we hang around with are really going to be able to drag us down? Well, this fella did. This guy's name was Ahaziah. He actually drugged down this man whose name was Jehoshaphat. He drug him down to a place to where Jehoshaphat became unpleasing to the Lord. And the Bible actually says in 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verse number 37, it says, "And the ships which they built to do business with, to do trade with, they were crashed upon the rocks, and they never were put to sale." Do you know, having a negative person in your life really actually sets you back. It could set you back for an entire lifetime. But there was another group of individuals. These three guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that were actually captives in the land of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was the king. He decided he was not only the king, but he was God. And he set up this large 60-foot statue to himself, this bronze statue, and made everyone worship at it at the sound of the trumpet. Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, "We're not going to bow down." So somebody went and snitched on him and said, "These three guys are not going to worship you when the trumpet sounds." And so he sent for them. Nebuchadnezzar said, "You guys come on in here, explain this to me." And finally what happened was, Nebuchadnezzar said, "I'm going to throw you in the furnace if you don't worship at the time that the trumpet sounds." They said, "Well, honestly, King, we don't really care. We don't care what happens to us. We don't care if you throw us in the furnace," because he said, "Our God will deliver us." And he said, "Well, then I'll make the furnace 7 times hotter." He said, "We don't care how hot that." They told him, "We don't care how hot you make the furnace. You know, even if God doesn't deliver us from the furnace, we're not going to fall down and worship you. There's just no way that we're ever going to do this stuff." Now, talking about Jehoshaphat and Ahaziah once again, maybe what Jehoshaphat was going to do was he was going to be able to help Ahaziah. He thought to himself, I'm going to bring this guy to the Lord. I'm going to go into business with him, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start drawing him in to having a relationship with God. And what ended up happening was the opposite. Remember this. Evil influences good. Good does not influence evil. A person's got to want to change before you can really ever have any kind of effect inside their life. They've got to be turned toward the Lord. And when they are, the Holy Spirit is going to run into their lives. Now, I'm going to talk about this again next week, but I wanted to begin to give you some things. So here are a few things that you need to understand about the connections that you must have inside your life. Remember this. You need people inside your life that will encourage you to do the right things. that no matter what, when you're going through a tough time and what you're doing is you're thinking to yourself, well, I think I can compromise here. I can actually, change my life a little bit right here. Why do I always have to be so, I don't need to always be so strict. Well, I guess that's true, but at that time when you're feeling that way, you need to call up the person who always encourages you to do the right things. Call them up. Don't call up the person that's willing to help you compromise, because of this, is that, remember this, compromise is the pen that writes the story of your future regrets. Compromise is a pen, and it writes a story. It writes the entire story about what you're going to regret in the future. Well, when we talked about David being a man after God's own heart, just because you're a man after God's own heart doesn't mean you don't make mistakes or even commit what we'll call sin. But David got tired, and every year, kings would go out to battle at the month, probably March or April, the first part of the month. But this particular time, when it was the time for kings to go out to battle, David remained in Jerusalem. All of his troops went out. His leaders, commanders went out, but David remained at home. And that was at the time that as David was out on his balcony, that all of a sudden as he looks, he sees Bathsheba. She's bathing on her roof just as well. But here she is. She's a girl that doesn't know what's going on, but David views her. And so David, lonely, tired, worn out in this whole situation, David tells a servant, "Go and bring that woman to me." And when she came to him, even after David knew that this was one of his mighty men's wife, David had sex with Bathsheba. And went from that moment forward, when he did, David's life went down the tubes. Does anybody think that David didn't think about whether or not that was going to occur? He thought he could get away with it. But believe you me when I tell you, compromise is the pen that writes the story of your future regrets. When you compromise, it's over. What about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the ones that we just spoke about, encouragement to do the right things? What about them? What if one of them would have said, what if Shadrach would have said to Meshach, you know what, it's no big deal. It's no big deal. Hey, look, we'll give them a little curtsy. They've already taken away our families from us. What they've done is they've brought us over into this foreign land. They've killed everything. All of Israel is in captivity. And we're now eunuchs because they castrated them so that they couldn't reproduce. And at that particular time, the guy said, well, hey, what's the difference? We'll compromise anyway. Yeah, because we're going to be thrown into the furnace. And what would have happened if, in fact, that Shadrach would have believed Meshach? All they needed to do was say it to Abednego. And Abednego would have said, well, I guess so, okay, because people help you make right decisions, or they help you compromise. It's one or the other inside of your life. Number 2, a relationship that you're looking for with people are those who are humble enough to correct themselves. Those who are humble enough to say that they're wrong. How many people do you know that are willing to come back and tell you that they were wrong about something that they did with you? Now, a lot of times what will happen is that people will come back and they'll say something, but that's not really until after they know how displeased that you are. But how about somebody who just said, do you remember this situation that we had yesterday? I just want to tell you, I'm completely wrong about all of that. And here, I believe that you're right about all of this. Because self-correction, friends, self-corrections is the proof of proven character. Self-correction. A guy that's willing to humble himself, a person that's willing to actually take a lower seat in a situation because that individual really believes that you were right and they're willing to correct themselves in front of you. One of the biblical characters that was like that was Joseph. Joseph was a man. Joseph was a man who at 17 years of age was given his father's cloak to actually run all of his father's business. His brothers didn't like it because he was the youngest of the bunch. And when he went out to see his brothers and to find out how that they were doing and bring the news back to their father and the report back to their father, they decided what they were going to do was that they were going to throw him into a pit and then sell him into slavery. Well, they did. But Joseph held his character. Joseph was a slave for 11 years, and he was in prison for 2 years. But how did he get to prison? There was a woman whose name was Potiphar, and it seems like a lot of problems happen right in this place in a man's life. But Potiphar, the most beautiful woman in all of Egypt, set her eyes on Joseph while her husband Potiphar was off to work. But Potiphar believed in Joseph. He believed what Joseph could do because everything that Joseph did, God made to prosper for Potiphar. Everything that he did. So there was a time when Potiphar's wife, came on to Joseph, and Joseph just said to her inside the house, he said, "How can I do this thing and sin against God? How can I do this? I can't do this. How could I ever do it?" Because Joseph was a self-corrector. Because self-correction is proof of a proven character. And Joseph ran from that. And Potiphar believed Joseph more than he believed his own wife. And put Joseph in prison. And he was there for 2 years instead of having him executed. I think for sure that Potiphar put Joseph in prison to save him from Potiphar, not to punish Joseph for what had happened. Now, the third connection that you have to have inside of your life, and this is very important, you need to have people in your life who celebrate your faith, who celebrate your accomplishments, who celebrate your wins in life. They celebrate your faith. Now, what really is faith? Every person deals with fear in their life at some place or another. They do. If they tell you that they don't, they're lying. Just forget about it. Every person deals with fear somewhere. The fear of being left alone, the fear of being rejected, the fear of not having enough, the fear of going bankrupt, the fear of disease. People have fears all throughout life. And faith, when you have faith, you need to have people that celebrate your faith, because faith is not the absence of fear. Faith is denying fear the right to speak. Faith isn't the absence of fear. Fear is going to be everywhere inside your life. You're not going to be able to get away from it. But faith is denying fear's right to speak inside your life. Now there were 4 guys that had a friend that he was paralyzed. How he got there, nobody knows. But what ended up happening was that this guy had 4 friends, and they all heard of Jesus. They heard of Jesus. This guy, man, he wanted to be well. He was really up, and he really believed, but he needed his 4 friends to be able to take him to a meeting that Jesus was speaking at. when they could not get into the meeting because of the amount of people, because of the crowd, they went up on the roof of this person's house and began to rip up the roof, and they let this man down right in front of Jesus where he was. Because everybody needs 4 friends who believe in their faith. They celebrate their faith. Well, I believe that that's enough for today, and I know that you have gotten something out of this. Who are these people? Who is your life team? Who are the people that are around you? Who do you want to have in your life? You need to go after those relationships. But the number one relationship you have to go after is a relationship with Jesus. Not necessarily a relationship with God, but a relationship with Jesus Christ. I hear more and more all the time people giving ascendancy to God. Well, is that the God of Islam? Is that the God of a religion? Of some other type of religion? Or is the one who you really need to have a relationship with, is it the one who has redeemed you and paid the price for your sin in order to bring you into fellowship with God? You can have a relationship with the Father through Jesus Christ just for the asking. If you'll come to Jesus and admit that you need God, you need this connection with God, but you can only get it through Jesus. Because in the book of Hebrews 7:25, it says that he is able to save them to the uttermost who come to God by him, because he lives to make intercession for you. Call out to Jesus and you'll see your life be transformed.